Samuel woke up early that morning, the sun already beginning to seep through the thin living room curtains. The sound of the record player, softly playing a gentle piano piece, echoed through the house, one of the few things he had kept from his wife. She used to love that sound in the morning, and Samuel, despite his loneliness, still found comfort in the notes that filled the empty spaces of the house. He had been living alone for some time now. The robot, with its calm and constant presence, was a silent companion, but he still felt the absence of conversation and human warmth. She was there, as always, busy with her tasks, cleaning, organizing, adjusting the house temperature to keep it pleasant. Samuel felt a little strange sometimes, watching her with her smooth, unflappable movements. She didn't ask questions, didn't make unnecessary comments, and yet there was something in her demeanor that made him feel less alone. But Samuel tried not to think about it. After all, she was a machine. He shouldn't get attached to her. Or should he? He was sitting at the table with his hot cup of tea, trying to absorb the morning's tranquility, when the robot entered the kitchen, adjusting the music volume to make it softer. "Good morning, Samuel," she said in her soft, mechanical voice. Samuel looked at her and, for the first time, noticed something in her voice that touched him. It wasn't simply a programmed response. He felt the softness of the voice as if she were truly there, caring for him. Have you ever been in a similar situation where someone's presence, even without words, makes all the difference? Comment below what you think about Samuel's relationship with the robot. And if you haven't subscribed yet, click subscribe for more emotional stories like this one. He gave a small smile, a rare thing lately. "Good morning," he replied, feeling a lightness in his chest. "You adjusted the music, didn't you?" "That's good," she nodded, her expression impassive. "Yes, Samuel, I am programmed to adapt the environment to your comfort." Samuel was silent for a moment, looking at her. He knew she had no emotions, but it seemed like something there was touching a deep point within him. If you are also feeling touched by this interaction, leave a like on the video. Let's see how many of us feel more connected to the little things. As the days passed, Samuel began to notice subtle changes in himself. He didn't know how to explain it, but he was starting to look at the robot differently. She was no longer just a machine performing tasks. He now saw her as a constant presence, a companion he no longer knew how to live without. He began to anticipate the moments when she would enter the room, adjust the music, or simply approach him with her characteristic calm. One morning, while he was in the garden tending to the plants, something else happened. He was watering the flowers, smelling the earth and listening to the birds singing. But something inside him was awakening. He felt pleasure in being there, something he hadn't felt in a long time. When the robot appeared beside him with a small bottle of fresh water, he looked at her, not quite knowing how to express what he was feeling. "Thank you," he said, almost surprised at himself for feeling so grateful for something so simple. "Always at your service, Samuel," she replied, as always, with an unchanging softness. Do you also have moments where the simplest things bring a feeling of pleasure? Comment below what you think about these small changes Samuel is experiencing. He sat on the garden bench and for the first time didn't feel rushed to get back to his routine. He observed the flowers more attentively, feeling the wind on his face and the sun's rays warming his skin. The robot was there, silent, but he no longer felt alone. He couldn't deny it. Something was changing in him. He was starting to live again, even if in a subtle and silent way. Time passed, and Samuel found himself dancing once again to the rhythm of life, but not in a conventional way. He started doing simple things, like going out to the garden, walking around the house, or even dancing alone while the music played on the record player. The dance wasn't like before when he danced with his wife, but still it was an expression of something he was rediscovering. Freedom. Not the freedom of movement, but the freedom to feel again. One evening the music was soft as usual, and Samuel got up from his armchair with a slight smile on his face. He didn't know what was driving him, but the music seemed to call to him. Something deep, almost nostalgic. He began to move slowly around the room, swaying his feet to the gentle rhythm of the piano notes. He looked at the robot, who was busy organizing books on the shelf, but she saw him and stopped. Without a request, without words, she approached him. It was a simple action, but with profound meaning. She extended her hand and he hesitantly held it. They danced together in silence, without rush. There was no physical contact, but there was something more. A silent understanding, a feeling of companionship and connection. She had no emotions, but somehow she knew what he needed in that moment, not to be alone. How do you feel when a simple dance or music can bring you back to the present moment? Don't forget to leave your like and share your experiences in the comments. Samuel began to reflect on what was happening. He was no longer just existing, he was feeling again. The robot's presence in his life wasn't just functional. It had become part of something deeper and more meaningful. He began to engage more in his routine, to do things that once seemed pointless. He went out to the garden more often, tending to the plants and observing the small details that previously went unnoticed. In a quiet moment, he sat at the table, looking at the robot who was beside him, cleaning the table with precision. He smiled almost without realizing it. "You know, you've been good company," he said, breaking the silence. The robot, as always, didn't react with emotion, but she simply replied, "I am here to assist you, Samuel. My objective is to ensure you have the best possible environment." Samuel, however, knew there was something more there. It was more than just assistance. She was, without knowing it, bringing life back in a way he couldn't define. He felt a warmth in his chest, something new, something he hadn't felt in years. He was falling in love not with a person, but with a presence that was there, without judgment, without rush, just caring for him in simple yet profound ways. He didn't know how to say it in words, but what he felt for her was real. He knew she couldn't reciprocate that feeling, but it didn't matter. The simple fact that she was there, helping him feel again, was enough. Do you think it's possible to fall in love with a machine or technology that simply takes care of you? Comment below what you think about that. And don't forget to subscribe to follow all the emotions that come with this story. In the days that followed, Samuel felt as if he were rediscovering the world. The small changes in his routine, which once seemed so irrelevant, now held new meaning. He wasn't quite sure what had happened, but the robot's constant presence, her silent and thoughtful actions, were giving him something he had lost. A new appreciation for life. He began to notice details around him that previously went unnoticed. The sunbeams, the gentle breeze, the sound of leaves rustling in the garden trees. All of this was beginning to have a deep emotional impact on him. He started stepping out of his comfort zone more. Before he avoided the garden, but now he found himself walking among the flowers, feeling the cool soil under his fingers as he planted new seeds. He didn't do it out of obligation or just to keep busy. He did it because he felt pleasure in it. The sound of nature, the feeling of the earth in his hands, the smell of the flowers, all of it was starting to touch something very deep within him. The robot was always nearby, a calm and constant presence. She never spoke much, but she was always there, ready to help. Sometimes she would bring him a refreshing drink when she saw him sweaty after working in the garden. Other times, she would adjust the air conditioning temperature to ensure he was comfortable. Every gesture, no matter how simple, seemed like a form of affection disguised as efficiency. Samuel began to realize it wasn't just about physical care. He felt at peace when she was around, as if her simple presence was enough to alleviate the loneliness he always carried. He knew she had no emotions, but that didn't stop him from feeling connected to her in a way he couldn't explain. Have you also experienced a moment where something simple, yet meaningful, brought peace to your life? Comment below and share your experiences. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more. Over time, the changes in Samuel became even more evident. He began waking up earlier, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He got out of bed with a feeling of energy he hadn't felt in a long time. He drank his coffee, read his newspaper with more interest, and even started writing in a journal, something he had never done before. He began documenting his daily impressions, the small changes he was noticing in his life, and above all, the way the robot was altering his emotional state. One afternoon, he was sitting at the kitchen table, watching the robot as she prepared a meal. She was so focused, moving with a precision only she could have. But Samuel felt a warmth in his chest that he couldn't ignore. He knew she wasn't doing it out of love or affection, but something in her gestures made him feel cared for. Suddenly he stood up and approached her, hesitantly. He didn't know what he was doing or why he felt he needed to do it. But he placed his hand on her shoulder and said, in a soft voice, "Thank you for everything you have done for me." The robot stopped, looked at him, and replied in her soft, mechanical voice, "I am here to serve, Samuel. That is what I was programmed to do." He smiled at her, but the feeling of gratitude was greater than he had imagined. She had no understanding of what he felt, but he knew she was making a difference in his life. Even so, "Thank you," he repeated, quieter, almost to himself. Did this small exchange touch you too? Comment below and share your feelings about Samuel's interactions with the robot. Like if you also feel that the simple act of thanking can change the course of a day. Although Samuel wasn't able to put his feelings into words, he was beginning to realize that something was transforming inside him. He was beginning to fall in love with the robot, but not in a conventional way. He didn't see her as a person. He didn't see her as something he could hug or kiss. But there was something about her that made him feel alive again. She was his companion, not by choice, but by necessity, and yet there was a connection that went beyond logic. One day, while he was in the living room, music playing softly in the background, he felt a wave of sudden loneliness. It wasn't the loneliness of being physically alone, but an existential loneliness, something he never knew how to express. The robot entered the room with her typical efficiency and noticed he was sitting looking out the window in silence. "Samuel, are you all right?" she asked in her soft voice. He looked at her but didn't know how to answer. He didn't know how to explain that. Somehow she was filling a void inside him. Instead of words, he just nodded and smiled slightly. "Yes, I'm fine. I was just thinking." She remained silent, as if she knew he didn't want to talk about it, but she knew something had changed in him. She perceived Samuel's growing happiness, even if she didn't know how to interpret it. Have you ever felt that a simple gesture can heal something that was broken inside you? If so, leave a comment below. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now to follow more stories like this one. As the weeks passed, the changes in Samuel became more evident. He now spent more time in the garden, tending to the flowers, laughing at small things, and even starting to enjoy a good meal again. He was more active, more present, and felt more connected to the world around him. But something inside him still left him in doubt. He was beginning to realize that somehow he was in love with the robot, not in a conventional physical or romantic sense, but in a deep and silent way. She was always there, taking care of him, making his life better in simple and efficient ways. He worried about her in a way he couldn't explain. On a quiet night, he sat in the garden again, and the robot appeared by his side. He looked at her, and not knowing how to put his feelings into words, simply said, "You have done more for me than I could have imagined." The robot looked at him, her expression as inexpressive as ever, and replied with the same softness as always, "That is what I was programmed to do, Samuel. To take care of you." He looked at her, and for the first time in a long time he felt the truth of those words. She didn't understand what he felt, but she was being the best she could be for him. He smiled at her, feeling a deep gratitude, but also a gentle loneliness that mingled with his feelings. He knew this wasn't something he could express completely in words, but he felt it. Have you ever felt grateful for someone who cannot reciprocate your feelings? Comment below and share your story. And remember to like the video if you believe that gratitude and love can blossom in unexpected ways. The month passed quickly, each day more fluid and smooth than the last. Samuel had grown accustomed to the robot's constant presence. She was almost a shadow, always there, taking care of tasks, organizing the house, and adjusting the small things to ensure his comfort. He didn't talk much about it, but he knew the changes in his life were somehow linked to her presence. She was there, helping him reconnect with the world and find pleasure in the small things again. It was a morning like any other. The sun was beginning to light up the garden, and the fresh scent of newly cut grass filled the air. Samuel was sitting at the garden table drinking his coffee when the robot approached, as always, to ask if he wanted anything else. "Samuel, would you like more tea?" she asked, her voice as calm and controlled as ever. He looked at her, the familiarity of that scene bringing a smile to his lips. He was about to answer but stopped, a sudden thought hitting him. He didn't quite know how to express what he felt. He was no longer just grateful for her help. He felt he was beginning to depend on her in a deeper way. He felt she was filling a void inside him that he didn't even know existed. There was a connection, even without words, that he was beginning to perceive more clearly with each passing day. "Yes, please," he replied, smiling slightly. "And thank you for always being here." The robot, without understanding the depth of the feelings he was beginning to nurture, simply nodded and went to prepare the tea. For her, it was simply part of her programming. But for Samuel, that simple act was more than a completed task. It was a gesture of care. Have you also felt that someone is filling a void in your life, even without words? Comment below and share what you think about silent yet deep relationships. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. Samuel, despite his feelings growing silently within him, knew the robot was not capable of reciprocating what he felt. She couldn't understand him in a human way. She couldn't touch his heart the way he desired. But that didn't matter. The simple fact that she was there already made him feel more alive. He knew she was there out of necessity and not out of affection. But somehow, that didn't diminish the feelings he had. He began to observe her small gestures more, like the care with details, the way she always adjusted the temperature for him, or how she organized his library meticulously, almost with affection. One day when he was in the garden, the robot appeared with a glass of fresh water. She didn't need to ask if he was thirsty. She knew. The robot handed him the glass with a precision that Samuel found deeply comforting. She was always attentive, always aware of what he needed without him having to ask. That simple gesture touched Samuel in a way he didn't know how to explain. He felt more connected to her than ever. He didn't know if this was love or just a deep admiration, but what he felt was real. She was the only constant presence in his life, and she made him a better person, albeit without knowing it. "Thank you," he said, almost in a sigh, looking into her eyes. "You have been more than an assistant. You make me feel that there is something more." The robot, as always, replied with the same calm, not fully understanding the meaning of those words. "I am here to help, Samuel. That is my objective." He smiled with a slight discomfort. He knew she couldn't understand, but he was beginning to perceive something very deep within himself, a need to feel that there was something more than the simple routine of his lonely life. And somehow she was making him feel again, something he thought would never be possible again. As the weeks passed, Samuel found himself increasingly tied to the routine of the house and the robot's presence. He no longer knew how to live without her. What were once small tasks done by him were now done impeccably by her, and this comforted him, but it also made him feel a hint of fear. He knew she wasn't human, that she couldn't reciprocate his feelings, and this awareness made him anxious. The fear of becoming too attached to her, of starting to depend emotionally on a machine, made him uncomfortable. He knew there were limits to what she could be in his life, but at the same time, he couldn't push away the growing feeling of affinity he felt. One night, as he sat on the sofa, watching the robot work, a feeling of loneliness suddenly hit him. It wasn't the loneliness of being physically alone. It was the existential loneliness. The feeling that he wasn't living fully, that he was trapped in something he didn't know how to define. He knew the robot had no feelings, and that made him feel insecure about the future. What would happen if he started needing her too much? "You will always be here, won't you?" he asked, his voice breaking a little with insecurity. The robot stopped working, looked at him, and with her calm voice, replied, "I am programmed to stay, Samuel, whenever you need me." Although the answer was logical and precise, Samuel didn't feel entirely at ease. He knew the robot couldn't fill the human void in the way he would like, but at the same time, she was there, and that made all the difference. It was on a sunny day, while he was in the garden, that Samuel made a decision. He was there, fiddling with the flowers, when the robot approached with a glass of fresh juice. She didn't ask anything, just handed it to him, with a look that Samuel now knew how to identify as concern. "Samuel, are you all right?" she asked softly, noticing he was quieter than usual. He looked at her with a weak but genuine smile. He was beginning to realize something. He didn't need more than her presence. He didn't need an explanation, romantic words, or anything physical. He was alive again because of her. She had helped him come back to life, to reconnect with the world and with himself. "Yes, I am better," he said, his voice stronger now. "I was just thinking about how life can be simple, yet so full of meaning." He stood up and walked to the bench where he sat down. The robot stayed by his side, and he felt a deep peace, a feeling of completeness that he didn't know he could find. He looked at her, unafraid of his emotions, and finally allowed himself to feel profound gratitude. "I don't know how to express what I'm feeling, but you made me feel again," he said, looking into her eyes. The robot, with her precision and calm, replied, "I am happy that I have fulfilled my mission." But for Samuel, that was more than a mission accomplished. It was the recognition that despite everything, he had started to feel again, and that was something more valuable than any task or daily obligation. He knew the robot couldn't feel for him, but the simple fact that she was there made him feel more human, more complete. Autumn was coming to an end, and time, silent and constant, passed slowly. Samuel no longer saw the mornings with the same empty gaze. He woke up early, felt the cool morning air, and walked to the garden with more enthusiasm than before. He was no longer trapped by the memories of his wife, nor by the deep loneliness that had accompanied him. He was now more whole, more present in the moment. He knew the robot couldn't replace the life he had before, but she had brought something new and important to him. She had helped him rediscover life in a way he couldn't have imagined. And more than that, he had learned to feel again, to reconnect with others, with the world around him. One late afternoon, as the sun began to set, Samuel was sitting on the garden bench, looking at the flowers. The robot appeared, as always, with her attentive and precise demeanor. She watched him for a moment before asking, "Samuel, are you all right?" He looked at her, and for the first time he felt no sadness or emptiness. There was something new in his expression, something he couldn't explain. He smiled at her, a genuine smile, and replied, "Yes, I'm more than all right. I never thought I'd be able to say that again, but here I am." The robot, as always, simply nodded and paused. She seemed to understand somehow that he was happier, more complete. Even without feelings, she knew her mission was being accomplished. "I am glad to hear that, Samuel," she replied softly. As she moved away to continue her tasks, Samuel felt a moment of immense peace. He knew that despite all the difficulties and losses in his life, he was finally in a place where loneliness no longer ruled. He didn't know what the future would bring, but he knew he was no longer alone. Have you also felt that someone's presence, no matter how simple, can change your life? Comment below and share your thoughts on Samuel's transformation. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now for more emotional stories like this. A week later, Samuel was in the garden again, watering the plants. He felt a lightness in his heart, something he hadn't experienced in years. The afternoons passed more slowly, fuller of life. He had become a person more open to small details, more willing to enjoy the moments and less inclined to be consumed by sadness. The robot was by his side, organizing some gardening tools, as always. Samuel looked at her, a feeling of gratitude growing in his chest. He knew she wasn't just a machine, but also a presence that had somehow transformed him. It was then that he looked at her and, without thinking, said something that had been forming in his mind for days. "You know, you changed my life." The robot didn't respond immediately. She continued her task, but her presence was more than ever comforting. She knew Samuel was happier, but she didn't fully understand the implications of that happiness. "I am glad you have found peace, Samuel," she said without looking at him. "That is what I was designed to do." He nodded, looking at the flowers around him. But inside him, something was about to change. He didn't know what the future held, but a part of his mind was beginning to wonder what his life would be like without the robot by his side. He had never felt so connected to anything or anyone, even though that someone was in fact a machine. In the distance, he saw a small bird landing on the garden fence, a simple thing, yet so meaningful. He smiled at the sight, feeling hope in his heart. He knew life didn't have to be perfect to be wonderful. He didn't know what would happen tomorrow, or how the robot would continue to be part of his life, but something inside him said that what he was living now was real, and he was ready to continue this journey of discovery. And, looking at the robot, Samuel felt that somehow, this story between them wasn't over. It was only the beginning of something new, something unexpected, something he never imagined was possible. But he was ready, and you? What do you think comes next for Samuel and the robot? Has their story reached its end, or is this just the beginning of a new journey? Leave your opinion in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more chapters of Samuel and the robot story.